Hello, everybody, and welcome to Crystal Ball 22. This time we're going to focus on biodiesel and renewable diesel. We did this in December, and we're talking about RNG, EV, and hydrogen, and we're going to have another Crystal Ball webinar in a couple of weeks talking about ethanol. But I want to welcome you all to biodiesel and RD because this is a very fast-growing market. We're going to have Sarah Caswell, our senior regulatory consultant and policy expert, will give us a policy update in the various aspects involving biodiesel and renewable diesel. Roxby Hartley is our biodiesel LOB manager and is going to give us a look back at where that fuel type was in 2021 and kind of where it's headed in 2022. And Andrew Clapp mans our biodiesel audits on the audit team, and he is just going to kind of give you a wide overview of verification process.
Carbon is the biggest disruptor of the 21st century, and the world as we know it is changing. EcoEngineers can guide you to make the best decisions as you navigate toward your clean energy goals. Our diverse team of carbon analysts, engineers, scientists, auditors, and regulatory specialists are trusted advisors of the clean energy fuel sectors worldwide. Clean energy regulations are a maze. We simplify them with an unbiased approach and fully manage your compliance. Modeling your carbon reduction is complicated. We quantify your emissions with a rigor based in science. Together, we can create markets that will protect and grow your investment. We create sustainable solutions for a better tomorrow. We are EcoEngineers.
Hi, I'm Shashi Menon, a CEO of EcoEngineers. That video you just saw is EcoEngineers in a nutshell. We're a team of consultants, auditors, engineers, and scientists with deep expertise in low-carbon fuels, emerging technologies, and policies that are helping decarbonize the world. We are at the heart of the energy transition. At EcoEngineers, we are laser focused on aiding, assisting, and supporting this transition to a clean energy economy. Through our education programs, our science-based approach to life cycle carbon analysis, through our asset development support, our engagement with policymakers, and through our compliance management and auditing teams, we provide a 360 approach to usher in the clean energy transition. The ultimate success of low carbon fuel projects and ultimately the future of our planet depends on the successful execution of net zero goals. And that's exactly what our team is here to help you do. Thank you.
All right, now I'd like to introduce Roxby Hartley, who will go over a more in-depth agenda for our webinar today. Go ahead, Roxby.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. This is really an exciting space at the moment because we're seeing so much growth, renewable diesel and SAF, and I think it's going to be a great webinar. We're going to introduce Sarah Caswell first, and she's going to go over the regulatory and policy updates. We're going to go over the LCFS, some lessons learned we had from verification. We'll have a look back and a look forward into what's going on in the renewable diesel and biodiesel markets, at least from the EcoEngineers point of view. And we're going to have a Q&A session at the end. Without further ado, I'm going to ask Sarah to take over and talk about regulatory changes, policy and regulatory updates.
Thanks, Roxby. I appreciate it. I'm going to try and quickly go through all of the myriad activities happening on the state and federal levels related to these fuel types. There's a lot going on, and I know that I don't have very much time. So if any of you on the call would like any more information, more details about anything that I talk about, please don't hesitate to reach out to me after the webinar. I'd be happy to talk with you. Let's start with the Biden administration. The EPA, as everyone knows, has issued two proposals out for comment right now. One on setting the RVOs for 2020, a look back, and then 2021 and 2022. And then one proposing to deny outstanding small refiner exemptions. The comments on the proposed RVOs are due February 4th, and the comments on the SRE denial proposal are due February 7th. In the RVO proposal, there was this, in the look back for 2020, there's a slight decrease for biomass-based diesel to 2.43 billion gallons. For 2021, the proposal includes 2.43 billion gallons again for biomass-based diesel, and for 2022, 2.76 billion gallons for biomass-based diesel. Earlier this week, or last week, the industry representatives and stakeholders were able to testify at EPA's public hearing on the proposal, and folks from the biodiesel industry testified generally that they welcomed the proposed growth provided for in the proposal for 2022, and they stressed the need for the EPA to maintain the integrity of the RFS program and to avoid any delays in proposing and finalizing future rulemakings. They also stressed the need for EPA to get out its 2023 RVO proposal as soon as possible. By law, the agency was supposed to put it out already, but here we are. By law, also under the statute, presumably EPA would have to finalize the 2023 RVOs by November 30th of this year. They missed those deadlines in recent years, so the industry is hopeful that EPA will be on time this year, especially since the program implementation changes pretty drastically after 2022. I'll get to that in a little bit. But next, on December 23rd, I just want to make sure that everyone here knows about the RFI issued by the Department of Energy. The RFI is called Overcoming Barriers to Renewable Fuel Scale-Up and Demonstration, Request for Information. Comments are due by 5 p.m. Eastern Time on January 31st. And the RFI is seeking input from biofuels producers and technology developers about readiness to scale process technologies to pilot and demonstration scale SAF, or sustainable aviation fuel, renewable diesel, and renewable marine fuels. The RFI also seeks input on how existing first generation facilities could be leveraged to provide low-cost feedstock and infrastructure for biofuels production, including information on practices that can reduce the carbon intensity of corn production. I just want to say generally here that the administration is putting sort of a new focus on biofuels, but particularly marine fuels and SAF technologies. In fact, in September, the president announced an effort across agencies called the Grand Challenge on SAF, and the agencies involved are DOE, DOT, EPA, USDA, NASA, DOD, and the General Services Administration. So the effort across all of those agencies is designed to accelerate the research, development, demonstration, and deployment needed for an ambitious government-wide commitment to scale up the production of SAF to 35 billion gallons per year by 2050, and a short-term goal of 3 billion gallons per year by 2030. That means that funding from the infrastructure bill that was passed and enacted in November, and then the possible enactment of a Build Back Better bill containing funding for renewable fuels, some of that funding could go toward this effort. So that's important there. I just want to revisit the RVO proposal just quickly. I forgot to mention that it also includes provisions on biointermediates, which I know are important to a lot of the folks on the call today. So the proposal addresses the generation of RINs from operations involving the processing of biointermediates. Basically, EPA is reproposing and updating a 2016 proposed rule that would allow fuel producers to take partially processed biofuels for further processing at a different facility and generate RINs in connection with the production of the finished fuel. I've been on several calls with folks from the EPA, and they stressed that since the comment period for the 2016 proposal was such a long time ago, they are not going to be taking into account the comments received in connection with that proposal. So as proposed in the proposed rule for the RVOs, biocrude, free fatty acid feedstock, and undenatured ethanol are the only biointermediates that would be eligible to generate RINs. But parties seeking to generate RINs through the processing of biointermediates would also be required to implement a quality assurance program according to the EPA. So I know I was on one call with folks from the EPA who stressed that they're really trying to get at what is the definition of biointermediates. So if you and your companies, if this is important to you, please consider responding to this comment period, because I know that EPA and EPA staff will be taking into consideration all the comments received in writing. Regulatory update for US Congress. A lot going on there as well. I mean, I think the theme is that under this administration and Congress, there's generally a huge effort across all sorts of legislation and policies to promote investments that will lead to greenhouse gas reductions, and congressional efforts are no exception to that. So as I said, in early November, Congress passed and the president signed into law the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Through this bill that was a total of $1.2 trillion, states are to receive the funding for projects, eligible projects under the bill. This bill, as many of you might know, sort of went towards more physical infrastructure projects, updating roads, bridges, broadband, things like that. But there are several sections where diesel retrofit projects could be eligible. And I have the sections up on the screen. And also alternative fuel vehicles running on diesel may be eligible as well. The Build Back Better legislation, which failed to pass at the end of 2021, but is still somewhat alive and may still pass this winter and spring, would extend the $1 tax credit for biomass-based diesel and renewable diesel through 2026. It also creates a tax credit for SAF through 2026, but it would replace both of those credits in 2027 with the clean fuel production credit. There's an equal amount of work going on the state level. It's really unbelievable how much work. So I'll try quickly to run through this. And again, if any of you would like more information or to talk about any of what I'm discussing here, please reach out to me. So CARB is undertaking a major rulemaking right now that will lead to substantive updates to the low carbon fuel standard program in California. They're updating their scoping plan as well. They have to do that every 5 years. So the scoping plan is intended to be updated and finalized by the end of this year, meaning that formal rulemaking process and formal comment periods on those substantive updates to the low carbon fuel standard wouldn't start until 2023. And on a recent call with CARB staff, they suggested that the updated LCFS rule could go into effect as early as January 1st, 2024. I want to mention here that CARB staff really wants stakeholder engagement during this process. So although the formal rulemaking process for updating the LCFS won't start until 2023, CARB staff is sort of in the informal stage of the rulemaking process where they conduct a series of workshops where the staff will propose certain updates in specific topic areas depending on what the workshop is focusing on. And during the workshop, the CARB staff ask for verbal feedback from stakeholders on the call. And then following the workshop, there's generally a 2-week comment period where CARB staff encourage feedback in writing on that workshop and what was discussed during the meeting. This is really important, and this part of the process, even though it's the informal part of the process, is really important because it informs the CARB staff on what the priorities of the industries are for how they would like the final updated LCFS rule to look. I have the web address on this page to subscribe for information on the future workshops. CARB tends to schedule the workshops just a week or two out, and they inform the public through email. And so really subscribing to those email updates from CARB is really the best way to learn about the workshops and what will be considered. There are also links to what the staff will present in terms of their proposals and all the information on signing up for the calls. A lot of other states are engaged in efforts right now to either update clean fuel standard regulations or to get past clean fuel standard legislation. So let's start. Oregon is asking for feedback right now on certain compliance scenarios in its effort to expand. They're trying to expand their rulemaking for low carbon fuels. Right now, there'd be a 10% CI reduction target for 2025, and this would basically the expansion would accelerate this CI reduction targets to, I think, 25% in 2035. And there are certain scenarios they're considering for how this could be done. Is it capable of being done by industry, and so forth. So they're looking for stakeholder feedback right now on the different scenarios that have been proposed in public meetings that they've held so far. I should mention that they are planning to have 3 workshops this spring and 3 more scheduled meetings on the expanded rulemaking. The workshops will be on January 20th. That will talk about reporting requirements, mainly dealing with liquid fuels. On February 10th, they'll have a workshop on electricity, and 2017, a technical workshop on pathways and GREET considerations. The additional meetings for the committee considering the different scenarios for expanding the rulemaking will happen on February 26th, March 31st, and May 26th. So, if you want to be involved in that process and provide comments to Oregon, I encourage you to attend all of those as well. Washington is at the early stages of its rulemaking process right now. As the slide says, the other notable 2022 activity in Minnesota, there was a bill that got very far down the legislative process last session, and the governor, since that bill didn't pass, but it came close, the governor since that time has announced his commitment to this legislation and to getting a low carbon fuel bill in policy in Minnesota to encourage those fuels. He's had listening sessions with stakeholder groups, and so there's a lot of momentum building up at right now as Minnesota is about to start its new legislative session. Industry and stakeholders are really encouraged and hopeful that a version similar to the one considered last legislative session will be passed in Minnesota. The same goes for New Mexico. A bill got very far down the legislative path last session, but it didn't make it across the finish line. So there's a lot of momentum, work being done, and hope among stakeholders that a bill will pass in New Mexico to create a low carbon fuel standard. In New York, right now, the governor is considering or sort of in in her budget process, and it looks like she will not be prioritizing getting low carbon fuel legislation done in New York at this point, but that could change. In Nebraska, they're starting last summer. There was a coalition which was has been led by the renewable RFN, the Renewable Fuels Nebraska group. They did a great job putting together a very sort of diverse set of stakeholders into a coalition to consider potential low carbon fuel legislation in Nebraska and what that would look like. There's also sort of efforts in Iowa and Illinois and actually other Midwest states, including Ohio and others right now, to see if it would be viable and worthwhile to move forward with an effort to get state legislation passed there. So lots of things happening on the federal and the state level here in the United States. I know Roxby is going to address activity in Canada as well. So with that, I will turn it over to Roxby.
Let's just go over a quick summary of the market, what credits are available for renewable diesel and biodiesel. Transportation fuel markets, RINs and IFS are anywhere in the lower 48 states. California has the LCFS RINs, and there's differential to petroleum diesel with the cap and trade. Oregon has a CFP and RINs, and Canada has the British Columbia RLCFR. Sarah covered the other emerging markets. Other state LCFS programs are coming forward. The Washington program is going to come into force on January the 1st, 2023, and Canadian clean fuel regulation comes into force on, I think, December the 1st this year. There's also the Corsair program that's going to start becoming more and more important, particularly after 2027 in the long term. So let's just dig into it. Let's get to the RIN price history. I think RIN prices for the D4 and the D5 are a great example of sell the news. When the announcements were made earlier last year, we saw prices come off, price volatility happen, and it's a good example of why the RIN price is so dependent on what the SREs are and what the RVOs are. And we see these staying fairly steady as we go forward with the current announcements. And right now, the RIN price is trading about 139, which is about a quarter off where it was a year ago. D4 RINs in 2020, this is to November. Oh, okay, Sarah covered these announcements in that the D4 RINs on biodiesel basis, this is not on an ethanol basis like the other RINs. There's 1.5 RINs per gallon, and in 2020 it's 2.43, slightly down. 2021 is also 2.43 billion gallons, and 22 is 2.76 billion gallons. And EcoEngineers is thinking that might be exceeded with all the renewable diesel announcements that are out there, which will have a little downward pressure on the pricing. D5 is based on ethanol basis, and there is some biomass-based diesel sold into the D5 as advanced biofuels, and those RINs are set at 4.63 billion gallons from 2020, which is down from what it was proposed, and then it increases to 5.77 billion gallons worth of, this is ethanol basis, by 2022, and D4 RINs are growing at 13.58% over the 2 years, and D5 over almost 25% growth. So just a reminder, D4 RINs come from pathways F and G largely, and this is biodiesel, jet, and renewable diesel and heating oil. And it's just transesterification and also hydrotreating, but excludes co-processing. D5 RINs cover the co-processing. And then there's one pathway for canola, which is for biodiesel and heating oil. Renewable diesel doesn't get a RIN, the D4 RIN for canola. And that's transesterification using natural gas or biomass for process energy. You can't get that if you're using electricity for process energy. So where did the RINs come from? This is to November. I checked this morning. We still don't have the December data out. You can see that a couple of things, that the biodiesel at the bottom is imported, and there's 157 million gallons imported in 2021 up to November. And then renewable diesel is from foreign generation. Basically, the producer makes it for import, and they had 329 million gallons in 2021. The larger numbers are for domestic biodiesel, 1.537 billion gallons, and domestic non-ester renewable diesel, pathway 1.7 EV per gallon, and that's at 675 million gallons. Interestingly, by November, there was over 1 billion gallons of fuel imported, renewable diesel imported. There is a little bit of 1.6 renewable jet being produced, but very little right now. And there's some non-ester renewable diesel coming into the country, about 15 million gallons, and therefore plant-specific pathways for those RINs. A quick review of D5s. Remember, these are largely from individual pathways or from co-processing. And you can see that we've got 51 million gallons of non-ester renewable diesel from co-processing, and about 14 million gallons of naphtha, and they're specific pathways. So what's the outlook? Well, if our predictions are correct, we'll see the RVO exceeded by the amount of renewable diesel likely to come online in 2022. E-RINs pathways might be approved in 22, 23, but what impact that will have on RIN pricing is yet to be seen. But overall, I think we have a bullish outlook that RIN prices are going to stay relatively high from administrative policy. So what happens after 2023?
Well, TBD. A lot's up in the air. There's different scenarios, really. I know that there's an effort, a national LCFS coalition in Washington, working to talk with Congress about passing national legislation that would presumably effectually replace the RFS. That could be in play. Who knows? Or, I've also heard that in the set process coming up that the EPA is about to engage in to set the 2023 RVOs under the new implementation. Just to quickly, the statutory volumes end under the RFS in 2022, and after that, the law includes some direction to the EPA administrator, giving him the authority to set the RVOs post 2022 in accordance with the guidelines in the law. I've heard that given the need for long-term stability and certainty in the market, EPA is cognizant of that, and I've heard at least that they are considering setting longer-term RVOs beyond just 1 year. So perhaps the RVOs are going to be known well before 2024, but we'll just have to wait and see. There's just so many moving parts, as I discussed earlier.
Sounds like there's a lot of uncertainty.
There's a lot of uncertainty now, but there's a lot of efforts going on at the federal level to address that uncertainty, so that there will be the federal market signal necessary to create the longer term market certainty going forward. So, I mean, honestly, it's sort of a wait and see approach. 2022 will be a crucial year for this industry.
Right, so very interesting. Okay, and then the last thing which isn't on the list is, I think, is the biointermediaries that could have an impact on feedstock, because we've all seen the pressure that feedstock prices have been under, particularly as UCO's exceeded soy pricing, perhaps the first time that I've seen it happen. So biointermediaries will be become important, but probably not in 2022. California update very quickly. There's many new pathways: 20 renewable diesel, 50 biodiesel, 13 naphtha, and 1 SAF pathway are new. Most of those are plant recertifications on new pathways for existing plants. There were pathways from 1 new biodiesel plant. And then the biodiesel, and then the mixture of the pathways was mainly the low CI feedstocks, which have a lot of value in California. There's only 14 seed oil pathways, and 4 of those were canola, and all those were biodiesel plants because the renewable diesel can't get there in, so there's no point really having canola pathways for a renewable diesel plant as yet. The interesting thing about this is that even though it's a 1 plant certification, I think the pricing of feedstocks is certainly making a lot of certainly biodiesel plants struggle, and I think we're going to see some plants mothballed over the coming year. LCFS price history, I think we've all been paying close attention to this. We've been predicting that we're going to see downward pressure on pricing for about a year now. It's down to 152 at the moment. And with the extra renewable diesel capacity coming online, we anticipate that the credit market's going to continue to soften through 2022. And we've modeled this through the next few years to show how that price is going to be affected by credit generation from all the different feedstock, from all the different fuel types. And part of the reason why we're seeing this softening is that we're seeing credit surpluses, and those are going to continue as renewable diesel supply comes into California. And we can show the composition of the fuels that are causing that surplus in the next slide. And you see renewable diesel is climbing, the blue line at the top. And it's now the biggest generator of credits in California. It's taken over from biodiesel, which was ethanol rather, which was been the mainstay for a long time. Biodiesel is staying fairly flat. The other 2 fuel types that are becoming important are electricity and biomethane. Biomethane and electricity do not have a huge impact on the volume of petroleum and therefore the amount of products like gasoline and diesel. They introduce a lot of credits into the marketplace, but they don't displace a lot of deficits. Renewable diesel does both. It generates a lot of metric tons of credits, but it also dramatically reduces the amount of petroleum diesel being sold in California, and therefore has a big impact on the net balance of supply of credits and deficits of credits. And that's why we think that we're going to see continuous softening in the LCFS price. So will credits continue to outpace deficits? We think that is likely to happen. The fuel types are important: renewable diesel, low CI RNG. We're seeing landfill gas being displaced by dairy digested class gas with a 200 or 300 point CI swing. And we see more and more low CI electricity volumes coming to California through solar projects and wind projects. We've talked about the CARB public workshop, and comment period is underway. It's important to get comments in if you want to see something in the regulation. And then the question is, will CARB increase the 2030 goals? I don't think CARB would consider the market a reason to go beyond 2030 goals, but I think they might see it as an opportunity. The extra credits companies might see it as an opportunity to increase the compliance curve, simply because they have a 2045 net zero target. And if you have the opportunity to get there quicker, I think they will take it. And we expect pricing volatility to continue with the increase in alternative fuels coming to California. Look forward, the LCF is working, definitely. It's accomplishing the goal of decarbonising transportation very effectively in California. And we've launched a pricing report to show how the LCFS pricing is going to change over the next few years, and it includes a RIN pricing analysis. And we have monthly updates for the report for people who want to purchase this. And with no further ado, I'm going to hand over to Andrew to talk about the exciting LCFS verification program and how that's working. Thank you, Andrew.
Yeah, exciting. I don't know if that's the right word, but it is happening. So I'm going to jump in here and talk a little bit about verification. I'm Andrew Clapp. I'm the team lead for our biodiesel renewable diesel audits that encompasses the voluntary RFS QAP audits we do. And then as of January 1, 2020, of course, EcoEngineers has been a verification body under CARB and performing verification and validation services for all types of fuel types, including renewable diesel and biodiesel. Like I said, it is a mandatory program, unlike the RFS's voluntary quality assurance program. So if you're participating currently in California, you are well aware of this and have probably been through this process at least once. If you're looking at getting into California, this is something you'll have to take into account with regard to time for compliance work. It is a lift to prepare for these audits. It includes obtaining a validation statement from your third-party verifier when you submit your application for a new pathway or an update to your pathway, and also annual verification of your CI data in the annual fuel pathway report and quarterly fuel transaction reports if you are a reporting entity. Annual verification reports are due August 31st of each year. Validation statements reports are due within 6 months of you submitting your pathway application, which we'll talk a little bit more about on the next slide. This is I believe from CARB here, just kind of gives you the cycle of the validation, verification, certification, credit issuance process. As a new applicant, you'd submit your GREET 3.0 calculator at this point to CARB. If it's a tier 1 process, that means you're a typical renewable diesel or biodiesel company with nothing outside the normal simplified calculator. You would submit a tier 1 pathway to CARB. They would do a quick review, pass it off to the verification body who performs the validation work. Upon completion of the validation, your reports applications deemed complete, you would have a CI for your pathways at that point and be able to report in that quarter transactions, any fuel you send in. Those quarterly fuel transactions are submitted obviously quarterly, and that's how credits are issued via CARB. And then at the close of the year, you prepare your annual fuel pathway report and annual compliance report, and then that annual fuel pathway report, which is basically your GREET 3.0 calculator, along with some supporting documents. And all your quarterly fuel transaction reports are then subject to verification by the verifier. A big consideration for renewable diesel and biodiesel participants in California as part of the verification is the requirements around specified source feedstock chain of custody evidence. For specified source feedstocks, what CARB is defining as specified source feedstocks, these are your waste oils, used cooking oil, your animal fats, your distiller's corn oil. All are subject to the requirements of ensuring that that material is characterized correctly as waste oils, and that requires records demonstrating the source of that material with regard to where it was generated as waste. So restaurant level stuff for used cooking oil, back to the rendering plant for your animal fats, and your ethanol plants for your distiller's corn oil. This can get extremely complicated or not so complicated, but the requirement is, of course, that supply chains are verified through this chain of custody evidence. So if that involves aggregators, brokers, first point collectors, there needs to be documentation all along that chain of custody that can be provided to the verifier and to CARB if they so choose. The nice thing is, of course, that the producers aren't necessarily required to have these records. A lot of the collectors and feedstock suppliers are pretty protective of this information and don't particularly enjoy sharing it with potential competitors in the marketplace. So as long as they are willing to provide access to the verifier to those types of records and that information, that can satisfy the requirement. Feedstock suppliers can also participate in the verification process by doing a joint application with a renewable fuel producer. This allows them to submit their own data to CARB and procure their own verifier and go through the verification process in-house with themselves and their verifier. And then that verification statement is applied just to the feedstock supplier, and they're able to demonstrate compliance by participating. So that's a nice little avenue to decrease risk and maybe increase some value for a feedstock supplier by being a full active participant in the CARB LCFS program. Here's a quick snapshot of the reporting timelines. If you're obviously participating already, you're pretty aware. The quarterly fuel transaction reports, those first 4, that's how you get your credits. So you'll want to make sure you get those reports in on time after the close of each quarter. Reconcile with your trade partners and get that all taken care of. The next big one, of course, is the annual fuel pathway report. That's your CI data, has to be submitted each year with the previous 2 years of data. That needs to be in by March 31st. And then all annual verification of both the quarterly fuel transaction reports and or your annual fuel pathway report is due by August 31. That is a hard deadline. You will get an adverse statement if your verifier does not complete a non-adverse statement by August 31st. So you want to make sure you get that done. Get with a verifier early and get that all lined up. Okay, so some tips from what we're seeing in the verification space, just for you all to think about if you are preparing to either enter the California market or already doing this and preparing for your 2021 data submission and verification. Planning is obviously important for anything. Failure to plan is a plan to fail, so we don't want to fail compliance audits. So let's make sure we have our LCFS monitoring plan in place as early as possible and are actively maintaining it, doing quarterly reviews or semi-annual checks on the information that's in there. That LCFS monitoring plan is really the foundation for the verification process. So it has all your key relevant reporting details, your procedures for maintaining QA/QC on your data, how you measure and monitor key inputs and outputs at your facility. So that is the #1 document to have ready for your verifier. When we get started, that's the first thing we look at. And you want to have it as complete and detailed as possible. Of course, there's a balance between overloading and providing the right level of detail, but work through that, make sure it's ready for your verifier so they can have a good foundation to start their sampling plan and risk assessment. The more detailed those procedures are, the more robust and rigorous your data management systems are, the easier the risk assessment is and the less onerous the whole process can be. Do internal data reviews, do internal QA/QC on your data in some manner, work with your team to figure out what works best for you all. Obviously, make sure you get your reports in on time. If they are not, CARB will send you a notification. And then talk to your feedstock suppliers. If you're involved with feedstock suppliers providing you with waste oils, make sure they are aware of the requirements, make sure they are willing to participate and cooperate and have the robust record keeping required to provide this chain of custody evidence. Talk to them early, get it in your contracts, audit rights if you need to. That's the #1 risk really in the space, which we'll talk about a little more. So don't wait until March 1 to start getting your data together for your reports. Don't wait till March 31st to submit your reports. You can submit them as soon as you have your data ready for the previous year. So the earlier we can start, the better. Some additional little pointers here. If you have off-site records locations, in addition to the required site visit to the production facility. A site visit may be required to the offsite records location as well. Specified source feedstock suppliers are on the table for site visits, depending on their risk level and the type of chain of custody evidence they're able to provide. They may be subject to a site visit. Maybe that's a place that processes both animal fats and used cooking oil. That can raise that risk level. Stuff like that might result in specified source feedstock site visits. Also, if for some reason there is a supply chain that is unable to provide sufficient chain of custody evidence, the biodiesel volumes associated with that quantity of feedstock will all have to be reallocated either to a higher CI or to a non-qualifying LCFS feedstock, which would end up as basically a diesel substitute pathway for those gallons, which would be a big swing from, you know, a 20 CI for used cooking oil to no CI difference with the diesel pathway. So make sure on the front end you are talking to your feedstock suppliers, make sure they know what's coming, make sure they are capable, if you can, in some way to ensure that you'll be protected on your end. Also to note, as this last little piece here, we talk a lot about California's verification, but now Oregon's CFP verification begins in 2022. Verification for annual fuel pathway reports and transaction reports will be due by August 31st, 2022. So add another compliance burden if you are participating in both California and Oregon. And be ready to get that cranked up and going too. Obviously, a lot of heavy lifting on the compliance side. So that's kind of it for the verification side. Thank you. And we'll go to Roxby or Q&A. Lindsay?
Yeah, thanks guys for the outlook on biodiesel, renewable diesel. We do have a number of questions that have come in throughout this. I don't know if we're going to get to all of them, but we will follow up with you if you do ask questions, and we'll follow up via email. There's a lot of questions about biointermediaries, I will say. So we're wondering what have we heard, if anything, that we can share other biointermediary companies looking beyond the 3 approved, and do we have any advice for those companies and what to plan for?
Biointermediates have been talked about for 6-7 years now, and I think the EPA has been very careful about which feedstocks it's choosing to allow. If you want other feedstocks to be included, then I think it's time to submit comments to the EPA and basically put the case for different feedstocks. They will be important, particularly I think syncrude as an ethanol for the process that takes it to jet fuel, and the lignocellulosics have other hurdles to pass to the EPA because of the difficulty in qualifying the feedstock in the first place with their separation plan. But having lignocellulosics not have to meet D975 out of the plant and allow them to be co-processed will certainly become important. Particularly, I think in Canada, I think a lot of refiners will end up co-processing syncrude, and it would be an advantage if that could also be sold in the US.
I just wanted to add a little bit on the biointermediates, just generally in terms of the RVO proposal. The call that I was on recently with some EPA staff talked about biointermediates in particular. I'm just going to read a couple of the notes that I had taken in case it's helpful to anybody on the call. They, as I mentioned in the presentation, they're really in this proposal trying to get to the what is a biointermediate and what the definition is, and they are really encouraging comment on that in the RVO proposal, but I think it's an attachment to it actually. I need to find the exact location. It's supposed to list in detail what the biointermediates are in terms of what is in and what's out, and so they want comments on the definition of what should be a biointermediate under the RFS program. You know, specifically, they want to hear back, should this be included? Should that be included? Should it not? And so forth. And again, I do, in the actual proposal that was issued, I only saw a listing of the 3, but this EPA staff member said that a full list is available. And to be honest, maybe I shouldn't be, I don't know. I haven't located that list yet, but I will. And so anybody on the call can contact me shortly for the list once I find it. The EPA staff member said that they were also trying to be very prescriptive on the relationship between the producer and the end fuel producer. They want comment on that. And then, because specifically they said that the goal for the proposal is to be able to track that relationship, for EPA to be able to track it. And then he said that the rest of the proposal is supposed to be just like the 2016 proposal.
Thanks, Sarah. I have one more question maybe for Andrew before I don't want to take up any more of your time. So how is it best to check data from a new supplier? And how does the timeline differ between a supplier with a joint application or a non-joint application?
So new suppliers, vetting suppliers, I guess there'd be any number of ways somebody could go about doing that. Attestations, certifications, make sure they're reliable business people in the industry, and try and get into some kind of a contract situation where you can get audit rights. I think is always a good thing. Get it in writing that they will be able to provide this information and will be willing to, and get it in a contract. I think is probably the best way to start. And then joint application versus non-joint application. If you're going to do a joint application, you'll need to have your supplier submit that alongside your application. So that will be going to CARB and being validated in parallel with your application. So there's some time, it's some efforts to coordinate, and you'll want to make sure you and your feedstock supplier are on the same page with that. And then if they're not joint applicants, then it's kind of a free-for-all. They're just part of your verification process. As you provide the records you have, verifier reviews that, develops risk assessment, sampling plan, and will review chain of custody based on that sampling plan. So the timeline is a little looser if they're not a joint applicant. If they're a joint applicant, you'll need to coordinate with them and make sure they're tied up with you when you do your application.
Like I said, with the joint application, it's the good thing is that the joint applicant has to be audited on the feedstock very early on in the process. Whereas if they're not a joint applicant, then you're basically taking their word for it until the audit, which could be a year and a half. You won't know the results of that audit for a year and a half. So it definitely mitigates risk for a fuel producer to work with people who are joint applicants.
And let's just do one more around the horn, if you will. Very briefly, what is your crystal ball prediction for biodiesel RD in 2022? What one big thing can you say?
Renewable diesel will go up. Biodiesel will stay pretty level, I think, because of feedstock considerations. Andrew?
My prediction on verification and auditing is continued levels of auditing on the state side and on Canada, and however markets you're going to participate in, verification is always going to be in the background, supporting those marketplaces. And the focus on the waste oil origin is going to continue to be the #1 verification issue, I think, for biodiesel and renewable diesel. And I expect EPA to be looking at that closely also for the RFS as well. So more and more feedstock certification, verification, auditing.
All right, Sarah, what you got?
Well, I think at least one of the state bills will be passed probably Minnesota or New Mexico, I'm going to predict, I don't know. And I think that the magnitude of the state level activity that I talked about earlier and the number of states that are involved, combined with the end of the statutory volumes under the RFS law, will together begin to put extra pressure on the US Congress to at least begin talks or consideration of a national low carbon fuel bill or something of the like.
Well, just to reiterate, we do have our last Crystal Ball webinar that is scheduled for February 16th. And then you can view our RNG, EV, and hydrogen Crystal Ball webinar on our website, on our blog right now, ecoengineers.us, if you're interested in that. Thank you, everybody, for attending, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time.
Bye, everyone.